let's begin and daven that the fruit of our learning should help to bring home all of the hostages and protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all of the innocents. Bring a speedy end to our war. And be a nilui neshama for my mother, Shalom Aleichem Bas, Menachem Mendel V'Rachel.
Amen.
So last time we did this story following on the heels of our sugya on Bulmuz. We had a story about Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, who each in turn were struck with Bulmuz and how they ate ravenously from whatever they could get. Rabbi Yehuda from a shepherd and Rabbi Yossi from people who came to help him out with food and drink when they arrived in the city. And then that led us to digress a bit onto another story with Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi and also Rabbi Meir, and a story that happened to them when they were traveling and stayed at an inn in which Rabbi Meir had this practice apparently of being careful about people's names to try to link their name with their character. And so he was suspicious of the innkeeper and subsequently didn't let the innkeeper watch his purse. And Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi apparently were not so particular about names, and they let him watch their respective purses. And the next day, the innkeeper denied having ever taken them, and then they managed to get them back through a kind of a trick of their own by pretending that the innkeeper's wife had told them, that the innkeeper had given instructions to the wife to give over the money, so they claimed, and they got their money, and then subsequently when the innkeeper found out, he killed her. Which is not a very good end. Hi, Paul. So I just did a very quick review of the story we did last time, and now we're at another story. So here again, we're just this was all a digression, right, from the topic of Bulmus, and now we have one more little story, which will start from here. Okay. Yeah, from here, Lulav. Let me get this a little bit bigger. Okay. Michael, why don't you start reading from here, Lulav?
Ulvasof havu daki bishma kimatu lahahu beta dishmea la ayalu legabe amri shama mina rashahu dedaktiv omer labala naufim kamo achrei baloti hayateli edna kalomar zakna ben ufam.
Ben Neofim.
Oh, Neofim.
Okay. So again, let's break this up. So Ulvasof, what does that mean?
So in the end, they were particular about a name.
So who was particular about a name?
I think it must be Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. They've kind of learned their lesson.
Right. After that, then ultimately they were also particular about people's names. And what happened?
So they came to a house of someone named Bala, and they didn't go up with him. And
they go in.
Don't go in.
Yeah, they don't go in.
Go ahead and with him, and they said, "Shema Mina, we learned that he's Rasha, as it's written in Yechezkel, Omer the Labala says Nu'ufim. No, I don't know
So,
that. I don't know.
okay, let's take a
The,
look. That's okay. Let's take a look for a second at this pasuk.
Labala must be the name. Is the name
Well,
or
okay. So what
oh
happened? They went somewhere apparently also where they were considering staying over, and for the head of the household or the head of that place, Beit could also just mean a place. It was named Bala, and so they all concluded that this is someone that we can't trust. We understand Shema Mina Rashahu, like you said. We see from his name that he's an evil person. Again, because they took his name and they found a pasuk with his name. In other words, with a word that was the same name, like we saw in the previous story. What was the guy's name?
Kidor.
Kidor. And right, and Rabbi Meir kind of darshaned his name. He said, "Oh, like Kidor Tapuchotem." So here it's even more straight. His name was Bala, and there's a pasuk in Yechezkel that says, "V'omar Bala niufi." So what's that all about? So as you know, I often go through the whole parak on just to get to one pasuk. I'm not going to do that this time because it's a long parak just to get here, to go through 43 psukim. But I do want to point out something about this parak. Um, the parak, it's a vision of Yechezkel, which involves an allegory. And it starts off, Vayidavar Hashem Elai Lemor, Ben Adam Shtayim Nashim Benot Eim Achatayu. There are two women who were the daughters of one mother. And it talks about how they prostituted themselves. They led these very licentious lives. And their names, right, Ushmotan, Ahala, Hagdola, the older one was called Ahala, Ahaliba Achuta, and her sister was Ahaliba. And then it goes on to talk about this. So, and it says explicitly, this is not left to interpretation. Ushmotan Shomron Ahala, Yushalayim Ahaliba. So Shomron, which was the kingdom of Israel, that was Ahala, and Yerushalayim was Ahaliba. And you may remember these names from there's at least one kina that you say on Tisha B'Av about Ahala Ahaliba. Paul's shaking his head. You don't remember. Well, it depends how many keynote you say, but it's there. It's there. There's at least one whole keynote that's devoted to this chapter of Yechezkel, because it's talking about how the kingdom of Yisrael and the kingdom of Yehuda, as represented by Ahalava Ahaliva, cheated on God, as it were, by worshiping other idols, and that's their prostitution, that's their znut, is that they made themselves available to and became lustful of other gods. In the allegory, it's that they had relations, with all of these different gods, with all these different people who represent the gods, and uh, I want to say about that. So Ahala here, the Radak explains, Uperush Ahala ki ha'ohel shala ein li chelik bo. The ohel, in other words, the ohel here would represent uh, the house of worship, or the temples actually that were in Yisrael, that were in Shomron. And he says, right, Perush Ahala ki ha'ohel shala. The ohala, even though there's no peak in the hay, which would make it possessive, but it's as if he's reading ohala, meaning her tent, right? And we know that tent is used in reference to the Beis Hamikdash. It's also called a tent because of the Ohel Moed. Even the Beit Hamikdash later on is sometimes referred to as the Ohel. Perush Ohala ki ha'ohel shala, because the Ohel was hers. In other words, the Ohel belongs solely to Malchut Yisrael. Ein li chelek bo. I, God, I don't have any part of it. And what's the tent? V'hem ha'agalim shas Yeravam. Yeravam built two temples, and he put up a galim. He put up calves in them. So that's Ahala. That's her tent. V'ahaliva Yerushalayim. Rotzel lomar ki ahali va. That's what the name means. Ahali, my tent, is in her, meaning Rotzel lomar ki ahali ba. My tent is there in her, in Yerushalayim. V'shama nishochen. That's where I dwell, in the tent in Yerushalayim, meaning in the Beit Hamikdash. Kiva Beit Hamikdash, Shu Mishkan Kvodi. So that's just as an introduction to the chapter, and it goes on and on about them. And as I say, we're going to skip it, even though certainly would be worthwhile to do, but it's a little bit far afield for us right now. And the pasuk that these chachamim thought of was this pasuk. V'omar lebala niufim, ata yiznu taznutea vahi. So I said, lebala niufim. So bala, I'll just switch back for a second. In the Girsa of our Gemara, you see this last line is in the round parentheses, because it doesn't appear in all Kitvei Yad. Doesn't appear in the version that's brought down in the Ein Yaakov, at least. But nonetheless, it could have been a later edition, but it's still helpful. It's like a perush. It's to understand the term bala. What does bala mean? So we learn what bala means from this pasuk in Breshit, right? So who said that? Acharei v'loti haytali yadna.
Sarah.
Sarah. Yeah. It's this pasuk. Vatitzchak Sarah b'kirba lemor. Acharei v'loti haytali yadna v'adoni zaken. So when did Sarah say that?
After the angels visited her to tell her she was going to give birth.
Right. So she laughs inside of herself and she says, after vuloti. So what does vuloti mean?
After the menopause.
So actually, Rashi explains that it's referring to menopause. It literally means after I'm worn out, right? Like balui, right? Something that bala means worn out, like after I'm worn out, which is apparently an allusion to her having gone through menopause. Haitali edna, that I would get my menstrual cycle again. That's how Rashi understands it. Or edna can mean just that, like I become my I become more youthful. My skin it means like really my skin becomes smooth again. In any event, I see from here in this context, bloti means worn out. In the pasuk in Yechezkel, Va'omar labala niufim. And I say to bala niufim. So niufim are adulterous acts, right? Niuf is adultery or also some kind of licentious act. And I said to bala niufim, to the one who was born out from niufim, in other words, somebody who's old and experienced in niufim. Here in the translation, they said, I said of her who was old in adulteries, which is kind of a little bit awkward as a translation, but it's an accurate translation. So what's the point? So what did Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, apparently, and Rabbi Meir, when they heard this person's name was Bala, they thought of this pasuk, Omar labala niufim. They said to the one who was old of niufim, of adulteries. And so they concluded from that that this person must be a Rasha. That was a bad sign that his name was Bala. So this is a very short story because they didn't go into this person's place, right? Lo ayalu gabe. They didn't go into him, into his house, because they were afraid because of his name. So that's a case where the name, this darshaning of the name or being medayek in the name apparently saved them. Okay, so that's the end of that sugya in the Gemara. And now we're going to go back to talking about the rest of the Mishnah. So Paul, let's see, share a different screen.
Me?
Yeah, hold on. Let me get this. I want to go back now. Let's see. We're gonna reread this part of the Mishnah, but start here. This is the Mishnah that we've been doing. Misha Chazo Bulmus. So we can read from there.
משאחזו בולמוס, מאכילים אותו אפילו דברים טמאים, עד שיעורו עיניו.
Go ahead.
מי שנשכו כלב שוטה, אין מאכילים אותו מחצר כבד שלו, רבי מתיה בן חרש מתיר. ועוד אמר רבי מתיה בן חרש, החושש בגרונו, איפה זה? מטילים לו סם בתוך פיו בשבת, מפני שהוא ספק נפשות, וכל ספק נפשות דוחה את השבת.
Okay, so stop there. So of course the first part, Mishach Bulmus, so that's what we spent the last couple of months on the sugya about Bulmus. And now we're up to this next part. So what does this mean? Mishana Shachal Kelev Shoter.
Probably a dog who has got how is it called in English? Rabies.
We say rabies.
Rabies.
Rabies. How do you say in French?
La rage.
Okay. So, right, apparently, we also say a mad dog, so someone who's bit by a mad dog. So what is the psak in the Mishnah? Ein
מאכילים אותו מחצר, מה זה חצר? אני לא יודע מה פה.
So Chatzer Kaved is, actually, I should have brought up I should have tried to find an illustration. The Chatzer Kaved is a little thing that sticks out on the side of the liver. It's called the Chatzer Kaved. And apparently, when we learned this Mishnah, apparently this was thought to be a cure for rabies. Is you would kill the dog, and feed the person who was bit by the dog the chatzer kaveh, this little piece of the extension of the liver. So the psak is, you don't do that. And Rabbi Mati ben Charash matir. So right? So there was a day of Rabbi Mati ben Charash who said, you're allowed to feed that to him. So let's remind ourselves here. Hello, שוטה.
This hasn't got to do with Shabbat, because you allow, maybe you allow to eat something which is obviously not kosher. It doesn't have.
Right. So actually, again, in line with the first part of the Mishnah, Misha Chazal Bulmus, Achino Tofilu Dvarim Tmeim. So the context is Yom Kippurim.
Mhm.
But we understand that this psak of the Mishnah would apply even not on Yom Kippurim, because the point is, someone who has bulmus, we understand from the Mishnah that their life is in danger. They need to eat presumably as soon as possible. So if all you have is Dvarim Tmeim, then you give him Dvarim Tmeim. And that led into, wide discussion about what you give them, and if you have different things that are not kosher, which would you give? Which is preferable to give him? Do you give him tevel? Do you give him truma? Do you give him shvi'it? Do you give him nevela, and so forth? So presumably it means even on Yom Kippur, but not only on Yom Kippur. And so here also, if someone's bit by a mad dog, then you might say same thing. You have to do whatever you can to cure them. And apparently there was this notion that eating of the chatzer kaved would be a cure. That's something you would do. But the Tanakama holds, no, that you don't do. And there's presumably you won't even do that when it's not Yom Kippur. Why not? Let's say it's not Yom Kippur. Why wouldn't you give them from the chatzer kaved anyway?
I mean, I can guess.
Well,
which is,
go ahead.
Number one, the person's life isn't in immediate danger. So, one doesn't have one action. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense.
What's the second thing?
There's doubt about the efficacy of the cure.
Yeah, that seems to be what's at stake here, right? So we have a machloket between Rabbi Mati ben Charash and the Tanakama. The Tanakama says, in any event, you don't give him from the chatzer kaved, presumably because he doesn't think it's an efficacious cure, efficacious treatment for someone who's bit by a rabid dog. What does Rashi say here? So Paul here, go ahead. Ein machilin mechatzer kaved shelo.
אף על פי שנוהגים הרופאים ברפואה זו, אינה רפואה גמורה להתיר לו איסור בהמה.
Meya.
איפה הייתי? אף על פי שנוהגים הרופאים ברפואה זו, אינה רפואה גמורה להתיר לו איסור בהמה טמאה על כך.
So what does all that mean?
אגב, חצר כבד, could this be the pancreas or something like this?
I don't think it's the pancreas. I remember, I did a little bit of a long time ago when I was learning chulin. I learned about it, but
I've seen it translated as the lobe of the liver, but yeah,
I've seen pictures of it. It's like a little extension of the liver. It's this, right? And so whoever, right? So so Paul, so 1 second, let me switch back.
So Rashi thinks that
it's
not that sure. This refuah is not that sure. So why should you? Enough for Gemara, it does. It's not completely sure that it helps. So maybe you should not use this since it is tameh, something like this.
Right. So of course, if the dog is a behemat tameah, a non-kosher animal. So you're not allowed to eat the flesh or any part of the dog.
Yes.
So the Tanakhama holds, af al pi shenogin harofim b'refuah zu, even though there are doctors who are accustomed to using this particular treatment, eina refuah gmura latir lo isur behemat tameah al kach. It's not enough of, it's not an absolute cure that would be sufficiently efficacious to allow someone to eat from the dog, from the behemat tameah al-kach for this, or it's for this purpose. And Rabbi Mati ben Charash Matir,
כי סבר רפואה גמורה היא. Or maybe, well, I'm not sure that maybe it was a safek, even if it is a safek, it's still.
no, but what does Rashi say? What? So
Rashi thinks that Rabbi Matya allows it since he thought it is refuah gemura. It does help.
Okay, so
but it could also be. I could also say that maybe he thought there's a safek that it helps.
Well, so here's what's interesting about Rashi, because there's, even according to the Tanakhama, the way Rashi understands. See, Rashi could have said "Ein machin mechater kaved shelo," because the davar yadua sherefuah zot lo moila, right? He could have said that we know that it doesn't help, but that's not what he says.
Yes.
He says it's not a refuah gemura, even though doctors use this treatment. So it raises, and I think we touched on this way back when we were in the Mishnah. It raises a question for us. Okay, so maybe it works 30% of the time or 10% of the time, but here someone's life is in danger. So why doesn't everybody say you can use it? Because safek nefashot lahakel. You don't need. You wouldn't normally, under such circumstances, you wouldn't think that you need something that, not just that it's not absolute, but even if it, as you say, there's a safek involved, and even if the safek is very small, that it could work. Why didn't I say you can use it? So I think in terms of the pshat, in terms of the pshat of the Mishnah, you would really have to lean to this idea that the Tanakhama holds, not just that it's not a refuah gemura, but that it's considered, it's considered to not really help. And maybe Rabbi Mati ben Charash is matir because he thinks there's a safek that it could help. So I think we'll come back
by the way, what Rashi comes many hundreds of years later. Maybe the knowledge, the medical knowledge is different when at the time of Rashi than what it was at the time of the Mishnah.
Well, of course,
almost 1,000 years later.
Right. It's much later, and I don't know how people treated, being bit by a mad dog. I don't know how they treated it in Rashi's time. Everybody knew that this was a problem. As we'll see, the Gemara is actually going to go a little bit more into this issue of the mad dog. That's the sugya that we're going to start to look at today. So just to keep in mind that we have this from the Mishnah, and let's say at least one thing that we get out of this machloket is we see that it could be that what you get out of this Mishnah is that, however we understand the Tanakhama, that we don't necessarily violate Isurei Torah to cure someone where there's a very low chance of it helping. However, it's whether I say exactly like Rashi or I say like this other pshat that I offered, but nonetheless, the Tanna Kama holds that you don't offer this treatment because this person is going to end up eating from a behemat to probably with no positive effect. So go ahead.
There's nothing. I mean, it seems that the Tanakama are overruling doctors.
Well, yes, and what? So, what's the point? What do you want to point that out?
I mean, just it's an issue. So, I mean, they, in other words, they hold themselves better able to evaluate the efficacy of a cure than certainly many doctors who are noagim in prescribing this.
Right. If you learn like Rashi says, then you would say what you're saying, that the Tana Kama is going to hold that even when doctors prescribe a certain line of treatment, we don't always listen to them. So again, something to bear in mind, and we'll examine that further as we go through the sugya. Let's go back here. So Michael Werner, why don't you read now? So this is where we are in the Gemara. Mishna Shachol Kelev.
Mishnach shel kelev shote v'chuli. Tanu Rabbanam Hamisha Devarim Ne'amru Bechelev Shote Piv Patuach Rigro Notef Azniv Seruchot Uz Navo Muna Al Yachotav ומהלך בצידי דרכים ויש אומרים אף נובח ואין קולו נשמע.
Stop.
נשמע.
Kol Nishma. That's the Braita. So there's a Braita, Tanu Rabbanan, right? The rabbis learned. So you can start to translate. Chamishad Barim Namru B'Kelev Shotan.
So 5 things were said regarding rabid dog.
Okay, so
these are like
so
signs that a dog is rabid. So his mouth is open and would Riro be foaming?
So it's his spittle or his saliva.
Okay, foaming at the mouth.
Well, what does notef mean? It's a good guess because you know what but what's notef?
Dripping?
Spitting.
It's dripping.
Dripping, okay.
His saliva is dripping from his mouth. His mouth is open and saliva is dripping.
And his ears, seruchot, and I'm not sure about that.
Okay, that's reasonable. So sruchot in this context means that his ears are floppy. His ears are hanging down. His ears are hanging. In other words, normally the dog's ears would be up, but his ears are down. Uznavo.
His tail. Well, his tail is between his legs.
Yeah, so his tail is resting on his legs, and in they don't have it. There is the Bach actually corrects the language here. Hold on a second. They don't have the Bach on the page here. A sec.
while you're pulling up the Bach, I will go the next phrase. Nehalech b'tzidei. So he basically walks sideways, I would guess.
Well, no,
No.
b'tzidei drachim.
Oh, b'tzidei derachim. He walks on the sides of roads.
Yeah, he walks on the sides of the roads, the sides of the ways. Here, I'll show you just the Bach is a little bit more like you were trying to say. The Bach says, Vaznav zruchot, uznavo munachet lo bein yarchotav.
Between his, that's right, different
Right,
preposition.
right, the tail is hanging down between his legs, and he walks bitzidei drachim. He goes on the sides of the roads. Go back here. Okay, so let's just a second. So let's count. Do we have 5? What are the 5 things? You can list them, say them.
Oh, so the mouth, the
His
ears, the
the
tail, and his gait. So mouth, ears, tail, and gait. There's 4 things.
You skipped one. Piv patuach,
Okay,
uriro noteif.
so the saliva is a separate. Okay, I was counting the mouth and saliva as one thing.
No,
Okay,
so
so mouth, saliva, ears, tail, and
not his gait, but that he's going where he walks.
where he's going. Where he's going. Yes.
Apparently, he's not going out in the open street. He's walking on the sides of the roads.
He's skulking.
Okay. V'yesh omrim, and some people say they add a 6th one. There's some people who add a 6th sign. And what's that? Af noveach ve'en kolo nishma.
He barks, but no sound comes out.
Yes,
No.
his voice is not heard, right? His sound, right? There's no sound from his voice is not heard. So he barks and his voice is not heard. So that's the Braita. So what's the purpose of this Braita? Chamisha dvarim ne'amru b'kelev shoten. What's the Braita here to tell us?
If these 5 things are not there, then this is a non-issue.
Well, maybe it's not a non-issue, but it's not a kelev shoten.
But not a non-issue where this particular discussion is concerned. It's not a caption.
I prefer my nisuach. It's not. It's telling me that these are 5 things that we see that would identify a kelev shoten. In other words, I would put it this way: it's possible to be bit by a dog. That's not a kelev shoten, but you would want to know. And why do you want to know?
Is to know if the person's life is in danger.
Yeah. So if it's a kelev shoten, as the Gemara is going to expand on this, then we'll know his life is in danger, and that's the overall subject of our Mishnah, right? With bulmus, with kelev shoten, with choshesh bigrono, which is going to be the next thing, and then it leads into the wider discussion of someone who we think maybe had a pile of rocks fall on them. But in all these cases where our question is this person's life in danger? Because if their life is in danger, then there's certain heterim that the halacha will give us in terms of treatment. Okay. So these 5 things, possibly 6 things. So now, Michael Schwartz, you'll pick up from here. Mimai.
Mimai Habi Rav, Amar Nashim Kashbuniot, Mish Sachakot Bo Ushmuel, Amar Ruach Ra'a Surah Alav.
Shora.
Surah Alav.
Okay, so I just want to help you break this up. It's Mimai is the whole question. Mimai,
okay.
for what?
Okay.
Havi Rav Amar,
So so Rav says, but
yeah, Rav would say,
Rav would say it's from women that are doing sorcery. Sorcering games.
well, Kashvania, Misachakot bo.
It's just sorcery in general.
Well, they're Nashim Kashvaniyot, like you said, so they're women who are sorceresses or women who are witches. Misachakot bo. And what are they doing?
They're playing it, causing it.
They're playing with it. We're playing with the dog.
With the dog.
In other words, they're just fooling around with this dog and making it like this. And Shmuel says, we'll see I'll elaborate in a second. Shmuel Amar,
Shmuel Amar, that it's a ruach ra, a bad spirit is falling on them, is alighting on them, dwelling on them.
right, dwelling on them or yeah, affecting them. So this question, Mimai, what does this refer to? From what? In other words, we read 5 things that identify a Kelev Shotin, and then we read a 6th thing that might also identify Kelev Shotin. And then the Gemara said, Mimai. So what is the Gemara asking?
What causes a dog to become rabid?
Right, so either it's asking from what? Like what causes the dog to become rabid and have these signs? Either that or it just refers to the last one, which is Noveach ve'en kolo nishma. It could be either. Just saying in terms of the reading, it could refer to either. So Rav says it's a result of Nashim Kashfaniyot who are playing around with the dog. And Rashi here says, Misachakot bo, right? They're playing with him. Marot bo kishvehem nischok. They're showing with the dog, with it, their magic for a game, right? For just for fun. So Rav thinks that this is a sorcery related issue. Shmuel says Ruach Ra'ah Shora Alav. It's a Ruach Ra'ah that's inhabiting or that's fallen on this dog. So what's the difference between the two? The Gemara asks this question. My Benaihu. Okay, Michael Schwartz, read a little bit more.
My benehu, echa benehu.
Second. Go ahead.
The meat tilea, the meat tile, b'davar hanizrak. That it's causing the death of something that was thrown. I'm not.
Your lemikdale would be a transitive form. To kill it, lemikdale, to kill it, b'davar hanizrak, with something that is thrown. So the question is, all right, so let's understand. I'm sorry that this is why I'm really sorry I didn't do my sheets, but because we'll have to go back and forth a little bit. But well, we can just say the Gemara wants to know what's the difference between Rav and Shmuel? So first let's understand the question. Right, Rav and Shmuel each give a reason for, let's say, your first shot. They give reasons for why a dog or how a dog becomes rabid. So Rav's idea is that it's the result of sorcery. And Shmuel's idea is that it's the result of a ruach ra'ah. So now the Gemara asks on that, my beinayu, what is between them? Meaning, what's the difference between them? Meaning, what's the halachic difference? In other words, this is always right. This is always the undercurrent or the maybe even the overcurrent of the Gemara. The Gemara wants to know. Okay, there's this machloka between Rav and Shmuel, but who cares? I could put to be a little more flippant. Who cares if it's for this reason or for that reason? The end of the day, it's a mad dog, and you're going to have to deal with the fact that it's a mad dog, and if it bites someone, they're in danger. So what difference does it make if it's from Nashim Kashvaniyot or if it's because of a Ruach Ra'ah? So the Gemara says, the Ika Beinayu, Yesh Beinehem, right? What the difference between them is to kill it with something that is thrown. So let's think about what that means from it. What would it mean to kill it? What are we killing?
The dog.
And what's something that is thrown?
An object like a rock.
Could be a rock, could be a spear, it could be a bullet. In other words, the nafkamina is going to be to kill it with something that is thrown, as opposed to what? What would be in contrast to that?
I mean, some implement that's in your hand, a sword, a club, what have you, with your bare hands.
Right. Any of those things where either you have direct or maybe just a 1 degree moved indirect contact with the animal. So what does that mean now in the context of the Gemara? It means that according to one opinion, they would say that when you're coming to kill it, you can only kill it by throwing something at it. And the other would say, you don't have to worry about that. You could kill it in a direct fashion. So who would say, which one says what? And also, what difference does that make? Why would I say one as opposed to the other? Why would I say it's relevant to say that you can only kill it by something that's thrown, as opposed to something like you say, like something with your hands, either maybe a knife or a sword, or maybe even with your bare hands? What's the difference between them?
I mean, perhaps there's some concern about contagion.
So, yeah. So to say that,
or some concern about becoming tameh, maybe.
no, let's stick with your first. Stick with your first answer. In other words, according to the person that would say that you're only allowed to kill it by something that's thrown, there's some fear that if you were to touch or to come into even some kind of contact directly or through some implement, that you could also be infected by the dog. And the other person would say, it doesn't matter. So which one would be which? Who would which person would say you can only kill it by throwing something? Would that be Rav, who says it's because of witchcraft that the dog became this way? Or is it Shmuel, who says it's because of a Ruach Ra'ah that's dwelling on this animal?
I can come up with arguments either way.
Well, go ahead.
I mean, there could be some fear that the dog's bewitched, and if they're actually witches sort of at the moment playing with it, then they could bewitch you too.
Well, okay, so let's take that for a second. Maybe it's because of the sorcery aspect, or the witchcraft aspect. So why would that mean? Then that would imply that that I'm not worried about Ruach Ra'ah being transferred. right? Because it's either one or the other, right? We say this is the difference between Rav and Shmuel. So only one of them can hold that this disease is transferable.
Actually, I really don't have any. I mean, I don't really have any basis. I'm just guessing. So I'm saying witchcraft is more, the, witchcraft is transferable. But I mean, I just,
It's what you're saying is completely reasonable. It's not like we're experts in either witchcraft or ruach ra'ah. But I think it's more likely the other way. That is, ruach ra'ah shora alav. In other words, there's a like, as it were, some kind of an independent body, which is the ruach ra'ah, that is now dwelling on the animal. So the fear would be that if you come in contact with the animal, you will come into contact with the ruach ra'ah, whatever that is. But it's something that Shmuel thought was a real thing. And so that would be the problem. If you hold like Rav that Nashim Kashvaniyot Mesachakot Bo, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're present. They bewitched this dog. The dog is bewitched. But if you come into contact with it, you're not necessarily going to be bewitched. And here, Paul, are you still with us or not so much? Paul. Here, I want you to read this Rashi. Lemikdale b'davar hanizrak. This is a Rashi Tevot Lamed Mem Daled Leman Amar.
למען דאמר רוח רעה שורה עליו, לא יקרב אצלו להרגו בידיים, אלא זורק בו חץ או סכין והורגו. He's right, but I don't see that this is written in the Mishnah.
You mean in the Gemara?
In the Gemara, okay.
The Gemara just says the difference.
בעזרת דבר הנזרק. You should kill him without touching him, just throw something at him, at the dog.
So the Gemara said, we have a machloket Rav and Shmuel. Rav says the dog became a kelev שוטה al yedei kashvaniyot. And Shmuel says the dog became a kelev שוטה because of ruach ra'ah sheshora alav. So Gemara asks, what's the practical difference between them? In other words, what's the halachic or practical difference? So the difference would be when you come to kill the dog, do you kill it directly, or are you allowed to kill it directly, or are you only allowed to kill it by throwing something at it? So Rashi explains, Lamanda amar ruach ra'ah shora alav. According to the one who says that there's an evil spirit that's dwelling on this dog, you shouldn't come close to it to kill it with your hand. Rather, you have to throw an arrow or a knife at it to kill it. The idea being that the Ruach Ra'ah could be transferable. Now, how does Rashi know that it does refer to the Ruach Ra'ah and not, as Michael wondered, maybe Kashvaniyot can also be transferred? We don't know. That's because Ruach Ra'ah appears in a number of places in the Gemara. And there was this notion of Ruach Ra'ah that says why, you wash your hands in the morning is because of Ruach Ra'ah. The Gemara doesn't define exactly what Ruach Ra'ah is, certainly not in terms that we think of, but this was, at the time, Zayad Davar Yadua. Everybody knew there was such a thing as evil spirits. In this context, what we understand is that the Ruach Ra'ah is, as Michael said, we have to be afraid of contagion. We have to be afraid of the Ruach Ra being transferred, that the Ruach Ra is something that could be transferred. If you think of Ruach Ra, now, Chazal, as far as we know, right, we're not familiar with germ theory. But if you think of Ruach Ra, which this will work actually in other places in Gemara that talks about Ruach Ra as being bad things that we can't see, right? What's Ruach Ra? Are bad, they're actual things that bring bad things, and we can't see them. So they could be germs, they could be bacteria, they could be viruses.
That's what we say today, but they didn't.
I just said, I introduced this by saying they were not familiar with germ theory as such, but in a broad sense, they had this understanding that when you come into contact with certain things, that may have ruach ra'ah, that could be transferable, and that's what you see from this Gemara here.
Contaminated. We would say that you could be contaminated, and they thought it's the same. It's the same
Right.
thing, even if you don't understand it.
Right. So for practical purposes, in this regard, for practical purposes, it's the same. So yes, we who are more sophisticated scientifically, will say, yeah, it's a ruach ra'ah. It's the dog has been afflicted by a virus. Rabies, I think, is a virus. If I'm correct about that. But in any event,
Yes, it is. I think we know.
I'm pretty sure. Or maybe I don't know. We can look it up. I'm not the doctor in my family. My brother's the doctor. I could ask him. We could also just look it up. But the point is, okay, I just want to wrap this part of the Gemara up in terms of reading the Gemara. Let's just go back. I want to understand what we did when we were just reading the Gemara. So in our reading of the Gemara, first the Gemara quoted our Mishnah Shachol Kelev שוטה, and what was the hemshech there? That you don't feed him me chatzer kaved of the dog. You don't give him the chatzer kaved. And Rabbi Matya ben Charash says that you do. Okay. The Gemara doesn't go into that. It goes right away into the defining what a kelev shoteh is. This is an example of something I've mentioned a number of times in the past, that essentially what the Gemara is doing by bringing this braita is defining the term kelev shoteh. It's defining the term. Before I go into anything else, I need to know how do I know that a particular dog is a kelev shoteh. So it gives us 5 definite signs and a 6th one that may also apply. That's the braita. And then the Gemara brings up this question, mimai, which seems to be what made this dog into a kelev shoteh. And for this, I have a machloket between Rav and Shmuel about how the dog became a kelev shoteh. So the Gemara wants to know, mai beinaihu, what's the difference between them? Meaning, again, Gemara wants to know, not stam, not just for the intellectual curiosity. Gemara wants to know for practical halachic reasons. Why would Rav and Shmuel have a machloket about this? They're talking about ostensibly, what are the origins? What difference does it make if it's from Kashvaniyot or if it's from Ruach Ra'ah? So the Gemara says there is a practical difference in their machloket, because according to Rav, when you come to kill the animal, which is implied that you're going to kill the animal, you can kill it however you want, even, as Michael said, even with your bare hands. But according to Shmuel, he would say, no, you're only allowed to kill it with something that's nizrak, something that you could throw on the animal and kill it that way. You're not allowed to touch it, And the reason you would not be allowed to touch it is because of the danger involved. There's a danger involved in actually handling this dog in a direct fashion. And then we'll see this now in the Gemara immediately following. Let's
Shay,
read. Go ahead.
I was sleeping when you talked about the Nashim Kashfaniot.
Yeah.
Of course, they are misogynes. They think that only the women have something bad in their, they can do a kshafim, yes.
Well, that's a separate discussion, but they
even
did.
even in the בימי הביניים, in the medieval times, they thought like this. They're going on.
So from this particular example, you can't say absolutely what you're saying, but you might say what you're saying. That
למה לא
you
גברים
fall.
כשפנים?
No, you're right, but maybe, you know, I could say maybe that kishuf, that this particular kishuf was associated with women. We have other kinds of things that might be associated with men, but nonetheless, I'm going to accept your comment because to go into it further, we have examples of men who had kishufim also. Right? There's a Gemara, there's a censored Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, which some Rishonim apparently thought referred to Jesus, who came back from Egypt with kishufim, that he had gone to Egypt, and when he came back, he had mastered certain kinds of magic. We also know from the Torah, right, that we have the Chartumim, who did things that we would associate with magic. So it's not that throughout Jewish literature that it's only women. We have it in other cases that they're men. But in this particular case, they associate it with women. If you're interested, I'll give you the daf. It's an interest. There's a Gemara there and a Tosfos, and in the original, like in it, I think in every printed edition, possibly every printed edition of the Gemara up until the late 20th century, they had to censor out a couple of lines because some people thought, it's not clear in the Gemara, but some people associated the person being spoken about with Jesus. And there was also a Tosfos that talks about it, which is also censored. But now we have the uncensored versions. Beli Neder, if I remember for next time, I'll show you. It's around Daf Kuf Dalet, I think. So if you're interested in this topic. On the other hand, we have a Gemara, and I think it's from a Tosefta, about how Chachamim executed, I believe, 60 witches in one day because of practicing witchcraft, which is an Isur D'Oraita. So, yeah. Anyway, it's getting late. This is what we're going to do. I want to read the next part, and then we'll pick up from here next time. So the Gemara. So now we understand there's a machloket between Rav and Shmuel regarding what makes a rabid dog rabid. What makes a mad dog mad? And Shmuel holds that it's because of a ruach ra'ah, and because it's a ruach ra'ah, I have to be afraid of it being transferred. And so I'm not allowed to touch that dog. So the Gemara says, Tanya kavate de Shmuel. Right? So we learn in a Braita kavate like Shmuel. And what's the Braita say? Kishahorginoto, ein horginoto ele b'davar hanizrak. So what does that mean?
So that when you kill him, you only kill him with something that you throw.
Right. And who are we killing?
The dog, the rabid dog.
Look,
The rabid dog. Okay, so that's the Breita. The Breita, so Tanya Kavate to Shmuel. In other words, I have a Breita that goes like Shmuel. I could say that goes just like Shmuel. That is, if my conclusion a moment ago was that Shmuel is going to be the one who holds that you're only allowed to kill the dog with the Davar HaMizrak. And now I have a Breita that says when you kill a rabid dog, you can only kill it with the Davar HaMizrak. So that goes just like Shmuel. So that would indicate to us, in terms of the origins, that the way the dog became a Kelav שוטה was through Ruach Ra'ah. And because of that, you're only allowed to kill it by throwing something on it. Gemara goes on to talk about this issue of contact with a rabid dog. And it says, "Dechayif be mistakan, dinachet le maye." Chayif is like chikuch, right? So if you rub against it, you become endangered. Dinachet le, if it bit, you'll die, right? It brings death. So the Gemara then goes on to expand on this. The chayef be mistakan mai takante. Right? If you rub against the dog, you're endangered. Mai takante. So what's it's fixing? How do you fix that? Mishalach mane v'nirhat. You take off your clothes. One takes off their clothes and runs. I'm just translating. Rav Huna bereda Rav Yeshua chaf be chad minayu b'shuka. So Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, chaf be rubbed against him, one of them, chad minayu, in the shuk. So a rabid dog rubbed against him when he was in the shuk, when he was out in public. Shalchinhu lemane b'rahet, and he took off his clothes and he ran. All right, so it's maserav. Amar, and he said, Kiyamti be'atzmi achachma tichayev aleh. I fulfilled in myself this pasuk from Kohelet, that wisdom will bring life to or keep its masters alive, which we saw earlier, right, with Rabbi Yochanan, who took a fig from the eastern part of the tree. Okay, so that's what we're up to. The Gemara it's not the end of this; it goes on, but that's the part we'll pick up on this part next time. So the Gemara here, again, just to summarize this last part, Gemara here is interested in this issue of the Kelav שוטה because they understood that it could be life-threatening. And they say right now we have a mamar that says if you're bit by a rabid dog, you will die. If it just rubs up against you, you're also in danger. And that fits with this idea of Shmuel that it's a ruach ra'ah, and so you shouldn't come into contact with the dog. Okay, Adkan, any last questions or comments?
Only that Rav is echoing the wicked witch, the West. I'll get you my pretty and your little dog too.
And with that,
how do
yeah,
you
go
take
ahead.
out the liver of the dog without touching it? Well, today you would put on gloves, but I don't think they had such things at that time, or they didn't think about it.
So I'm glad that you raised this, and something I want to raise it again next time. But maybe now we understand, maybe that's the reason the Tanakama says not to do it. In other words, not like Rashi's pshat. Maybe you don't feed him from the Chatzir Kaved because you yourself will be in danger.
Mhm.
Or it's possible, of course, Rashi also knew the Hamshech of the Gemara, and maybe Rashi held that once the dog is dead, that maybe we no longer
There's no
worry
more
about it.
ruach ha'ah.
Maybe,
Maybe the
right,
ruach ha'ah disappears when the dog is dead. Well, we know
right,
today that's not true, but
right. But maybe
you could
they
think
thought
like
that,
this, yes. Mhm. Mhm.
right. But your issue is very right. It's a good question because according to Rav Matya that you do feed him the Chatzer Kaved, but how would you do it? How could you do it practically? I don't see that anybody disagrees with this Braita that says that the only way you can kill it is b'davar hanizrak. So you have to do it. But all right, so then you have to say I think either one of those two things. Tov, I wish
I think this
everybody.
Nisyov, pasteurs, I don't know how you say in English, pasteur Nisyov is also taken from a rabbit
Right,
dog. So he also had to be very they are
he
more
had to, yeah, he had to be very careful in handling.
very careful by doing this. Yes.
Right.
And of course, we have to
So
How do you say
Yeah.
this Nisyov in English?
the about you're talking about Louis Pasteur.
Yeah.
Is that?
vaccination. Or
No,
not.
it's not. It's not for a
It
dog. It's
was.
not vaccination. It's
It's some. It's
Inoculation.
I don't know.
no. I
I
think.
it's
I
on
th-
Wikipedia.
right. No. I'll Billy Nether. I'll look it up because I know I have some vague recollection of what you're talking about. Michael, I think you want to make one more joke before we go. You're giving up. Okay. All right. So, okay. Thanks everybody. I hope you all had a pleasant Chag, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
D'accord.